Welcome, everybody, to today's podcast. Thanks for joining in to the Parkway podcast. We are so glad that have chosen to be a part of it. Today, we have a great episode planned for everybody. But before we jump into the episode, hit like on this video, hit subscribe on our channel, hit subscribe if you're listening to us on Apple Music or iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. We would just love to be connected with our audience. We love when you guys leave comments. We love connecting with everybody who's listening in. And we just want to be able to continue to put out great content for you. So if you would hit like, if you would hit subscribe, that would go a long way for us to connect and to continue to put out great content for you. Well, today we have Brad Zimmerman joining us. You may know Brad. This is how I know Brad. Brad, I know from videos that I've seen on the interwebs. Mainly on YouTube, but you'll see him on Facebook, on different places, wherever people share those videos. You've probably seen him on a Pro Presenter tutorial video. You may have seen the drum enclosure video that he did, which is fantastic. I've actually built those according to his specs. So that's been very, very useful and helpful. And he's also the creative director at Watermark Church in West Michigan. And he's also the owner of Church Media Drop. And so we would love to welcome today Brad Zimmerman to the Parkway Powerful Ideas podcast. Brad, how are you, man? How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here on yet another Zoom call in 2020.
What enthusiasm.
I know, right?
Yes.
We wish we could do it in studio, but even us at Parkway, we're obviously at our own location doing this. We have the new mandates up. How are you guys holding up with the new mandate that here in Michigan where we're following? Whether it's at home or at your church or at your job, what does that currently look like? Brad, why don't you kick us off over at Watermark? What are kind of some of the things you guys are doing right now?
Yeah, so when COVID hit, we went fully online. We've been live streaming, so I produced my first, I went back and looked at it because I helped a lot of people during quarantine with their live streaming setup. I went back and looked, and I produced my first video podcast tutorial on live streaming 11 years ago. And
Nice.
so we've been streaming
Wow.
for a long time and talking about streaming for a long time. And so streaming wasn't like a big shift for us. It was a pretty easy, smooth transition. But what was really tough was when we went fully remote and no one was in the building. And so we were doing worship sets that were fully remote. So I was playing drums in my living room of my house, and our guitarist was playing guitar at his house, and our singers were at their houses. And then I was mixing all of that together for every worship song every week of quarantine. And that was a ton of work, was really creative and fun, but that was a lot. This summer, we finally came back together and started doing stuff in person outdoors. So in July, we started doing outdoor gatherings at a secondary location. We're a multi-site church, and our second location is at a rented space. And so we did it outside there in their event area all summer, all the way up until October. And so then we came back inside in October with super limited capacity and stuff like that. And just this past Sunday, we went fully back online, but we're doing it all live and in person, so a lot less editing ahead of time and a lot less work ahead of time. And so we're just doing that all live for the next 3 weeks at least. Maybe it will go longer. And Christmas Eve will be the same way. So Christmas Eve will be a fully live streamed deal. With a limited in-person audience is the way that we're talking about it, so that if there are some folks that it would be better for their mental health or mental well-being to be with some other people on Christmas Eve, that they could still join us in person. But we're trying to have it be a really intentional live online experience.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, a lot of people don't get how
Very
much
good.
time goes into pre-producing something versus just doing it live and letting it be what it is.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've spent many hours. I'm sure, Michael, you have too, Todd. We've all experienced that, where you have to do all this legwork and it takes a lot more effort from a lot of different people. And on top of that, everything needs to be done early. So a pastor who's going to preach, for example, he's not waiting until Sunday to preach that message. He has to preach it like on Wednesday or Thursday, right?
Or Saturday.
Nope.
I mean, that happens still. So
yeah, man. Absolutely. No, cool, man. Well, Todd, Michael, how about you guys? What are your churches, what are they switching up since the newest mandate?
We're doing about the same thing Brad explained. We've kind of been through the gamut, and we're just nicely had our doors open, doing 2 services to just kind of break the people up a little bit. And now we're back to live stream with a handful of people in the sanctuary. So they're talking about doing that probably through Christmas as well. So, but I think Thanksgiving we're going to actually do a pre-recorded thing and then just release it on Thanksgiving. So the tech team can all be home with their immediate family.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. At least that's what we're telling everybody.
At least that's what we're saying.
Yeah. Michael, what about Central? What they do this past weekend? They were live, I think, right?
Yeah, they're continuing to meet live.
Rebels.
Every other pew.
Rebels.
Social distancing. The balcony is designated as a all mask area. So,
oh really?
If you feel like you have to have that, then the balcony is designated for that. And then, I think we're just staying the course.
Do they
I
have to
believe
social
Christmas-
distance on the ground floor? Do they have to social distance?
Yes.
At least? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So every other pew, and then families sit at least 6 feet apart in a pew if they're going to be in the same one. So yeah, it's definitely spread out. Central has the benefit of having a large sanctuary, so that does help. There is 2 services, and it seems to be working.
Are they also
I
doing
believe
a
Christmas
different
is an all-on.
service? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say.
No, we're not going to wait for you to
mom is
answer your
calling.
phone. No, Mom, you can't come for Thanksgiving.
Sorry, Mom. You told me you're not having Thanksgiving. So,
are you guys also doing a third service in the chapel? Is that something that's happening over at Central?
I don't believe so.
Okay, all right.
I'm not fully in the worship team meetings either, so I can't fully speak to everything that's going on. But
very cool.
I basically come in to do broadcast audio and then leave. So
okay. All right. Yeah. So my church is in Grand Rapids, and they decided to stay open, but it's super limited. So before they had rows taped off, now the rows that were taped off are totally gone. They're not even in the room to ensure, like this is how many people can fit, and people have to reserve a seat before they come. And I was surprised. It was actually full. For the most part this past Sunday. But this weekend we're going to pre-recorded. So tomorrow night we're recording all the worship, and the Wednesday the message is being recorded, and then they'll put it all together. And so that's kind of what we're doing. But after that, I think we're going to still meet in person for the rest of the year. We're not planning on not meeting. But we've had mask mandatory services ever for a while now. So there is no mask option. So we take that pretty seriously. Yeah. So, but cool. It's crazy to see how everybody's a little different, right? Central's still open, local's still open. Todd, your church is, gone virtual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Brad, it's good to hear your guys' perspective as well, man. Every church is trying to meet the needs, but I think at the end of the day, they would all agree that church is essential, right? In some way, that people staying connected to their faith and to others is important.
So the biggest thing for us, the reason I think most of the decisions we tried to make on this did not have to do with us within our church, but more what the community was doing. So during the same time, the public school system shut down and they didn't have to. The mandate was just for high schools and universities, and they shut down all of the the elementary schools in our community too. So we're just,
Same here.
we're trying to be the good neighbor. You know what I mean? You just, I don't know how else to say it. That's what.
Yep.
I
And
think
we have
we're trying to
healthcare
do.
workers in our church that are that work in COVID units, that are at their wits' end, and they are working mandatory extended hours and are getting COVID because of working those mandatory hours and putting themselves at pretty high risk. And so to stand by and say that what we do is more important than what they're dealing with in our mind doesn't make any sense, you know?
Yeah.
And
I agree
so
100%.
yeah, and it's hard because I agree that like our faith is really important, but we all know that the church is not something that happens on Sunday mornings.
Right.
The church is not a
Mhm.
service, it's not a program, it's the people. And the church is
Yeah.
wherever you are. And so the church can meet online on a Sunday morning. The church goes to the grocery store together as a family. The church meets in schools when they're in schools. You know, the church is everywhere because we are the church. So it doesn't really matter. If anything, all I've seen from COVID is how much bad theology is out there for Christians.
Oh, yeah.
When they make it about Sunday morning and they see that it's only about that one thing, or they make it about that one thing, and they go on Facebook and blast each other about stuff and start angry conversations,
Mhm.
all filled with really bad theology, you know, that like they can't back up with scripture. So yeah.
Absolutely. I would, yeah. And I'm
Just
right with
very
you.
very unproductive.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
right there with you though. I mean, when I say church is essential, I mean, the church as the body, the church as Christ
Yeah.
body, right? The bride of Christ, so to
Absolutely.
speak. But the American church, like how we traditionally know it to be, whether it's a traditional church or a modern church, but still the large gathering of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, that I don't know if is essential. And so like that's up for debate. And I know there's different schools of thought, but luckily that's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah, we better cut this one off in a
Nice.
hurry.
Nice
Could get pretty
segue.
deep.
But cool. Well, Brad, again, thanks for being on the podcast. And what we're going to be diving into today is going to be Pro Presenter, and wherever that takes us. But you, I would imagine, I mean, you're the one on the tutorial videos explaining what the new features of Pro Presenter are for every version that I've seen, whether it was 6 or 7. Did you do the tutorials for 5?
Yeah, I started with, oh man, that's a really good question. I think I started with 5, might have been 4, but I think it was 5.
Okay. Yeah.
I thought you developed the whole program.
No, there's a different Brad.
Oh, there is.
Different Brad.
I thought Brad is like the Pro Presenter guy. I thought he made it.
There
No?
are 2 Brads. There is
Oh, okay.
Brad, who is kind of a face for the company and does video training tutorials, and most people know me as the Pro Presenter guy. And then there's Brad Weston, who lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and developed the program for Passion conferences, was the first iteration of the program, and then has done a lot with Passion in North Point and all of that kind of stuff. And that's where it grew and got its legs and all of that kind of stuff. So
Absolutely. Well, let's run down the history then. I was mentioning earlier, like, so the first time I encountered Pro Presenter was in 2010. The church that I worked for at that time was using Media Shout, and then I transitioned to a new church in Seattle, and they were already on Pro Presenter. And that was my first kind of, I'd heard about Pro Presenter at that point, but hadn't seen it in action, like for myself, like using it real time. And it was a game changer for me. It was absolutely a game changer. I fell in love with it immediately. But it's gone through a few changes since then and has grown. I know that originally it was made for the church market specifically, right? I think it was maybe created for Chris Tomlin going on tour or something
no,
like
it was
that.
created for the very first Passion Conference.
Passion Conference.
When the first Passion Conference happened out in the fields, out in Texas, they wanted to be able to show text over video. And so Brad developed a program where every song was hard coded into it. You couldn't adjust anything. And he literally was sitting in front of the stage like hooked into the big LED walls that were, because they actually had video walls then. I was just trying to pull up what year that event was. I think it was in, what year was this? 97? No, not 97. Maybe 97. No.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
a long time ago, man.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I
Yeah.
can't find the better is one day live 2000.
Okay. So 2000 is
Yeah.
when it was basically
20 years, man.
the inception of it.
Yeah.
And then but so I know Michael, your church, and Todd, your church, we're all using ProPresenter, right? And so that's a little bit of the history of how it came to be, but it was revolutionary. I would say it still is revolutionary. It really changed the game. You know, I would say the only comparable, I've never used Easy Worship. And I know, Michael, you mentioned that there's still a couple of churches that you've run into that have Easy
I
Worship.
have seen a couple yet in the field.
Right. So
They are unicorns, but they're out there.
There's Media Shout and you know, shout outs to those companies. They're doing their thing. They're another solution. We're not here to build up one or tear down another. But in comparison to like a lot of churches using PowerPoint and Keynote and those types of presentation softwares, when they're compared to something like a ProPresenter, it is just night and day different. I wouldn't even put them in the same category. And I know that you guys have separated yourself, and initially it was created for the church market, but it seems to me that it's actually beginning to gain traction outside the church market. Can you speak into that a little bit, Brad?
Well, I mean, so I'm not directly involved in a lot of this, and who knows who's actually watched some of my tutorials outside of the church, because ProPresenter has been used at the last, 3 or 4 Olympics. In almost every venue at the Olympics. It's been used for NFL drafts. It's been used in stadiums. It's been used all over the place. And so it's not just, it's not just a program that is just meant for churches. It is, the reason why it's so revolutionary is because if you aren't familiar with what graphics programs took in the past, is they took dedicated hardware that was locked down to do one set of features. And what ProPresenter and even some of these other programs are trying to do is they're trying to allow you to grab whatever computer you have available, whether that's a Mac or a PC, off the shelf, whatever it is, and be able to do some really impressive things with it all live. This isn't pre-recorded videos. You're not rendering stuff out. When I was in college and I was rendering videos and they were 14-hour renders for 30 seconds of video and, all of that kind of stuff. This is all real time, live during the event stuff. And so that's what's really crazy is the amount of stuff that you're able to do live with whatever hardware you want. So that's the big thing. But yeah, it's been used all over the place for some really incredible events. Chick-fil-A events, Camping World, all sorts of different random things that I've heard of over the last even this past year, different events they've been doing. So
yeah, that's really cool. What I wanted to ask you was if somebody or a church, say somebody's watching this video right now, and why would we, all of us, I would say, us for being just users of the program. You are obviously a user, but you're also kind of involved with Renewed Vision. Why switch to ProPresenter? What is the reason? Obviously, regardless of the program that you're using, why is ProPresenter so worth it?
Yeah, so this kind of gets into some of the features of ProPresenter 7 in particular. But as we're all live streaming, as we're all trying to figure out how to do stuff live online or online and in person, because it's actually pretty straightforward in a lot of ways to do, let's say, Sunday morning in person or Sunday morning only online. There's a lot of different ways that you can accomplish those two tasks. But when you say, I want to do this in person and online and have one operator control both of them at the same time, that's when things get a lot more complex. And there's a lot more things that you need to figure out, how you're going to do it, what it's going to take. And a lot of the other programs out there don't allow you to handle that task very easily. So doing full screen graphics and lower third graphics and a confidence monitor and multiple other screens at the same time is not heard of in most other software packages. Most of them, I'm trying to think if some of the other ones, like if Proclaim or any of these other ones do this, but you know, doing lower thirds and full screen at the same time is basically just not a normal feature. You would have to have two different operators, two different computers. And then you're talking about, in a lot of those scenarios, you're talking about sending most likely just a bar, a bottom third bar to your video switcher, and you're just masking or keying out the top 2/3. You're not actually doing true alpha keying with, truly transparent text and soft drop shadows and cutout shapes and all of that kind of stuff. Because they can't actually send alpha. They're only sending a video input to your video switcher that you're kind of cropping down just like any other video. So when you're talking about doing some of those really truly professional features to make really great looking streams and stuff like that, ProPresenter is really one of the only choices that I can think of. And it's worth every penny. A lot of people might wonder about the new subscription model, which isn't really a subscription, it's a maintenance contract. But the maintenance contract for the new version, and if you look at this first year's worth of development in ProPresenter 7, it went from unlimited screens to live streaming directly from inside the program, to doing really impressive audio routing that you can send audio all over the place to different screens and different outputs and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of things that have been added here in just these first few months since the program's been released. And so I can't wait to see what it looks like in a year or two.
Well, and you went from having all these modules to all of those being included.
Yeah. So you could spend,
it's totally worth the price.
Yeah, when in ProPresenter 6, you had an alpha key module, you had a multi-screen module, you had a communications module, there was a MIDI module that was kind of a stripped down version of the communications module. But I believe the alpha key module was $1,000.
Yeah, I think I paid for every one of those modules, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And the multi-screen module only worked with 2 pieces of hardware. So you had to buy one of 2 different pieces of hardware, and one of them was awful. It was a terrible piece of hardware that wasn't well supported. Matrox kind of gave up on their own product.
Todd, yeah.
Don't even get me started on that thing. I love the day we frisbeed that thing out the window. I literally chucked it out the window.
Did you go Office Space on it and do a copy or beat down?
Oh my goodness.
Great.
And we'd never have any problems during the week, but every Sunday morning, like, I don't know why they're not working. Unplug everything, plug it back in, reboot this, reboot that.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, I love ProPresenter 6. When we were using ProPresenter 6, we did the master slave thing in order to get the lower third lyrics, right? That's
what we ended up doing. We're still doing that, which works great, by the way.
But ProPresenter 7, we recently switched over to it and went with the PCI card and chassis, and the lower thirds work seamlessly, man. It is absolutely it's my favorite feature because we use it the most right now with live streaming and the multi-screens. The one thing I wanted to track back to, though, because we have all people from all size their organizations are different sizes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when we're talking multiple screens, you had mentioned, okay, you're presenting in your room on a projector, right? Your lyrics. Yep. Then you have the lyrics that you want to send to your video stream. And then you said something, confidence monitor, which we're all familiar with here, but for some people, they may not know what that is. So I just wanted to at least shout that out. So a confidence monitor is another monitor, a third monitor, so to speak, or a second monitor that is for your band and for the people on stage to look at so that they can also see the lyrics or the content that's being presented simultaneously. And then you mentioned multiple screens, maybe going to the lobby or different rooms, the kids' church, around the building. And through ProPresenter, what you're saying, Brad, is that ProPresenter 7, you're able to do all of that.
Yeah, and you can do, so now you can do multiple stage screens, which you might be like, well, why would I need, if good rule of thumb is if the screen is showing the same thing, don't output it from the same computer, just split the signal and send it to all the different screens, because you don't want your computer doing more work than it needs to, right? So you got, let's say, 2 different screens on a back wall or something like that. And if they're showing the same signal, there's no reason to add another stage screen output. However, one thing that you run into in Pro 7 is you're starting to actually send a lot of different content to a lot of places that all is different. So you're sending, you got projector, you got live stream, you have stage screen. So you got at least 3 different things that all look totally different. You could have a lobby screen, and then there's options to honestly have a couple more outputs that could be totally different. And so being able to see all of those at one time in a multi-view is really helpful and really beneficial. So our ProPresenter operator has their main iMac screen, and then next to it, there's another screen that is a multi-view that's created inside of the stage screen that shows a preview of every single output going outside of ProPresenter.
That's cool.
And it has like master clocks and all of that kind of stuff, so they can see how long somebody's been on stage, all of that in kind of this master control just of ProPresenter. We're used to seeing that in a video world, in video world where we have our ATEM multi-view, or we have whatever video switcher you might be using. You're used to seeing that multi-view of like everything that's going on. But now in ProPresenter, you're doing so much in the computer. It's really helpful to see, like, when I clicked that thing, I clicked that slide, did it change everything the way it's supposed to be? Or is the wrong thing being sent to the live stream? And to be able to see that really quickly and easily, especially when you're setting up a presentation, to make sure it's flawless for your operator, so that you don't have to like explain too much of like, it's, click on this and it just does it for you and everything's going to work right. You can check that stuff along the way. So yeah, because you really can make it that you can have anybody operate it. So even though we're doing all of this complicated stuff, so like I said, we're doing in person, we're doing online, we got our stage screen, we got this multi-view for our ProPresenter operator. We do actually our audio, our multi-tracks for our band out of ProPresenter at the same time. So we have a 6-channel wave file that we're sending out of ProPresenter to our soundboard. So we're doing all of this different stuff, and that could sound really complicated, but if you put in the work to set up your presentation right, I have a 4th grader who runs that. So on Sunday morning for us, and she does awesome. And so she does it, her dad's running sound and she's doing that, and her older brother's running a camera for the live stream. And so it
awesome.
doesn't have to be this crazy complicated thing for the operator if you set it up well in advance.
Yeah.
Amen to that one.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It
It's
does.
very, very
It's a lot of stuff, but
volunteer
makes
friendly.
it very simple.
Yes.
So.
Yes. As long as it's set up correctly. And one of the things that I love about setting up ProPresenter, the reason I fell in love with it to begin with was how you edit songs specifically, right?
Sure.
Because that's something that every church organization is using it for, right? To present lyrics. But what I love is how you're able to do verse 1, verse 2, and you can add renditions of it without having to retype it. And that was one of the biggest things that saves people time, is the workflow within ProPresenter versus using a regular presentation software like PowerPoint, like Keynote, which some churches still may be using. And so that would be another big, huge a feature that I would mention, is the workflow in putting songs in and being able to take away choruses, or, however you are sequencing your song, it's very easy to adjust. Even for, like you said, like a fourth grader, like she can probably take away a chorus if she needs to for a song, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and so what you're talking about is, and if you're looking for tutorials on how to do some of this, I would definitely check out a tutorial on the Reflow editor. It is the easiest way to edit all of the text in your entire song within one interface without having to click into text boxes on every slide. You're editing all of the text in the entire song in one easy to use interface. And then after you've got all of your pieces of your song, just like a band has pieces to their song. So a band plays a verse and a chorus and a bridge and a pre-chorus or something like that. And then they just take those pieces and arrange them in whatever order they want. So a normal worship song is like verse 1, chorus, verse 2, chorus, 75 bridges, 2 more choruses, that's like kind of the normal flow of a worship song these days. And so you can set it up that way, or you could set up the song to be like, well, today we're just going to do 5 bridges and call it a day, like that's all we need today. And you can create a arrangement of the song that is just that. And so the Reflow editor and arrangements are two different things to definitely look into if you're already using ProPresenter and don't know about those or aren't currently utilizing them. They're super powerful.
Yeah, Michael, Todd, any questions you guys have for Brad in regards to ProPresenter?
I'm curious about, since I'm an audio guy, how are you getting 6 channels out of that?
Yeah, so ProPresenter can handle as many channels of audio out of your computer as your computer has available. So if you have, like I have a X32, like a lot of churches out there. And so we have just the XUSB, connected from a soundboard to the computer. So we have 32 channels in and out of our board. And so nice. I can send as many channels out of the computer as I want to send. We've actually kind of switched away from that. So that's how we used to do it. The way that we're sending our audio, or the way that we're creating that audio file, is I'm actually creating a multi-channel audio file inside Logic. And so I'm using Apple Logic, and I'm creating a surround sound wave file, which is basically just a wave file with 6 channels instead of 2 channels.
Sure.
And so, when you think, for a lot of people, if you're not familiar, surround sound that we have for TVs and stuff like that is basically just an audio file that has multiple channels. Instead of just having 2 channels of left and right, there's 6 channels, or sometimes there's 7 or 8 channels, but most common is 6 channels. And so I'm using those 6 channels just in a different way than you would for a multi-channel audio mix. So instead of it being like left, right, center, back, left, and right, and sub, I'm doing like click and cues, and then I'm doing like lead stuff and some pads, and then 5 is my
it's just not being
bass.
Yeah, it's just not being decoded,
right?
By another surround processor.
Right. Yeah, we're just sending.
Is there an incorporation? Is there incorporation with Dante?
So again, if the computer can see those audio channels or the audio card, ProPresenter can use it. So if your computer is seeing Dante, ProPresenter can see Dante and send audio over it. And currently, the way we're doing it is, so SDI, if you have an SDI card in your computer, SDI, every channel of SDI can send 16 channels of audio over a single SDI line. And you can use audio de-embedders for those SDI lines. And so you can get from Blackmagic, they have a box that takes SDI in, and then you get 4 1/4-inch outputs, and you get 4 channels out, and you can kind of stack multiple of those together. So I stack 2 of those together, and I get 8 channels out. So currently we have 8 channels out of ProPresenter via SDI that we plug in locally into the board. Because I'm doing some crazy stuff with my live stream for audio processing. And so I actually am using my USB from my X32 into a separate computer running MainStage as kind of a poor man's waves rack. And so I'm using MainStage to do audio processing on 16 different channels or groups of channels so that I can do real-time auto
Steps.
tuning and all of that kind of stuff.
Interesting. That's very
Very cool.
Very, very cool. Wasn't
Yeah.
there recently an announcement?
Yeah, so recently, so ProPresenter added live streaming. Oh boy, it's so hard to remember because this year feels like 10 years. So it was about a year ago, or like 2 months ago, that they released live streaming in Pro 7, and so you could live stream to any RTMP source. So that could be YouTube, Facebook. I mean, it could be RTMP-S, the secure version. So you could go to restream.io. You could go to any of the streaming platforms, basically. But they recently announced a partnership and integration with Resi, which used to be known as Living as One, but they upgraded their name to make it a little bit more easier to understand. They're not a marriage conference. They are resilient streaming, because Living as One sounds more like a marriage event than it does a streaming product.
Sure.
But yeah, so there's a new integration in there, and the difference, if you're not familiar with what Resi is, because I wasn't super familiar when I started looking into it and beta testing it and all of that kind of stuff, the difference is they're using a whole different way to do streaming than RTMP. And so they're using, what is it called? MPEG Dash, is that correct?
I think so.
I can't remember what the protocol is, but it's a way to send a different way to send video. And because of the way that the video is sent, you never have dropped frames, because every frame that's encoded on the computer gets sent to the web. And then your stream is a little bit further behind, so you're much less real time than you would be with doing RTMP. But you have a much higher quality stream that's much more reliable, because it's basically being sent from your computer to the web in chunks. And those chunks are being sent over time, and those are all being smashed together in their cloud service and then sent down to the end user. And so that way you're not, you can't have a web dropout that now drops, 10 or 20 frames along the way. It's either sending that chunk or not sending that chunk. And so you could have a internet outage at your building for multiple minutes, and the end user would never know it happened, because of the way that system works. So that's where the resiliency of their streaming protocol comes in, and is the first way to do streaming to Resi without having to buy dedicated hardware. So this is the first time they're allowing.
Really?
Yeah. So the only way you could stream to Resi before, I believe the cheapest encoder they had was it was either, I think it was $1,000 for the small one, for the Ray, and then there was much more expensive encoders above that. And so this is the first time that you can do it with what you currently have, and you can bring your own hardware to the environment and be able to stream without having to pay for hardware, which can be really nice if you want to move that way, or even if you want to test it out. It's a really great way to test and see, is that system worth it for you and your church or organization.
Yeah, so I recently did a project with a church here in Holland that wanted to create a multi-venue in their own building because of COVID. So they were shut down, and they were like, hey, our auditorium or our worship space only fits so many people, and we're going to have to spread them out. So what if we installed and had a video feed going into this other space, and we created more seats that were spaced out so more people could attend in real time? And so we ended up going with a Resi solution because they wanted to go multi-venue, but also go to the web. And so when I heard about, and that we did that right before the announcement. And so when I heard that Resi and ProPresenter Renewed Vision were going to be partnering together, I was like, man, that's like a match made in heaven. I think that's going to also do some great things, like innovative things moving into the future, because being able to stream straight from ProPresenter, right, through Resi service, is that what you're saying? Brad?
Yeah, exactly. So for just to get some terminology clear here, you have a streaming service and you have a streaming encoder.
Yes.
And so ProPresenter is a streaming encoder. So it's actually encoding the video and sending it online to the web to a streaming service, which is Resi. There are other streaming services out there. YouTube is a streaming service. Facebook Live is a streaming service. But the computer is the encoder. So it's not like ProPresenter is a streaming service that you're watching a ProPresenter stream. You're watching a Resi stream that was encoded by ProPresenter. So I just want to, sometimes people get confused on some of that terminology. Just
Absolutely.
like OBS is a stream encoder. And so that encodes a live stream, or vMix, those are other software encoders. And then you have other hardware encoders, like a Teradek is a hardware encoder, or you have like Magwell. There's
Hilo.
Yeah, Hilo is another one. There's a bunch of different ones, but those are hardware stream encoders. So just to get some of that terminology there, just so we understand the different parts and pieces and why you would match those together. So ProPresenter is the first way to do encoding for Resi outside of their dedicated hardware.
And that's amazing. That's definitely a big step,
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the fact that ProPresenter could do all of that simultaneously, it just blows my mind, right? When we're thinking about years ago, you were talking about at this Passion conference, they basically just wanted lyrics on a screen.
Yeah.
And now you're able to output video to so many different destinations. And I think that that's incredible, especially in the times that we're living in, where everything is over Zoom. And so what this means is that basically it's affordable for almost any budget, so if you have a small budget, you could probably find a way to still make something like this happen for your organization. And then you go upwards from there. But I think that's awesome.